everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Rachel. I'm a junior studying business and computer science here, and I'll be moderating tonight's event. Thank you, Terry, for coming to speak with us today. It's a pleasure to have you at the forum.
Thanks. Hey, everyone. I'm Terry. Thanks for having me.
Before we begin, if any audience members have a question, please save them for the end as we will be having an audience Q&A. Before we jump into what you're doing right now, I'd like to start at the beginnings of your career. Prior to holding senior positions at Riot Games and now Crunchyroll, you began as a software engineer, a highly sought-after role, especially for EECS graduates. As your career has taken on new forms over time, what have you learned about discovering your dream job?
Good question. I would say one thing that probably the thing that I learned the most was to take your time into really discovering what you want to do, right? Because your interests will change, your passions will change. I had an amazing time at Google. They were easily one of the best companies, right? Especially during that era, right? They weren't as, they were still relatively small compared to where they are today. Highly sought after company. But what I realized as I was entering that space, I stayed there for like almost 5 years, and I realized, I wasn't waking up every day super excited to do software engineering. Not that it was not a fantastic job, but it wasn't aligned with my passion, right? And it took me a really long time to figure out, like, is there something wrong with me? Is there something wrong with my expectations? And after talking to a lot of much smarter than me mentors, they really pushed me to go and figure out what else I wanted to do. So my parting kind of lesson to everyone is just like, take your time, like, don't rush, right? You think you have to, like, I know during college you're like constantly recruiting, constantly going after these roles. Afterwards, hopefully you get a chance to sort of relax and figure out what you really want to do. That's really important.
You left big tech to found Bread Labs, a platform aimed at content discovery. What factors influenced your decision to leave behind the stability of a larger company like Google and Yahoo and create something new?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. So from a timeline perspective, right, I left Google, I went to business school, and out of business school, I started recruiting for consulting. So I had an offer from McKinsey, and I was trying to figure out if I wanted to do consulting or do my own thing. And the partner who recruited me at consulting actually said, which one would you regret more, right? You can always come back. If you take this startup path and it doesn't work out, you can always come back. But if you don't take this path, you might regret it forever, right? So there's only a certain amount of period in your life where you can take a certain amount of risk. So that's why I decided I'm just gonna leave it all and go take the startup route. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If it works, it works. Along the way, you'll learn a lot. So that's what I did.
During your time at Bread Labs, it operated between 2010 and 2013, a period when managing teams across different cities and time zones was more challenging than it is post-COVID. How did you approach leading a multi-city team during that time?
A lot of travel, right? I flew between San Francisco and LA a ton. Today, I travel a lot too. I travel probably 150 nights out of the year. But back then, in order to maintain teams in 2 different places, you just had to figure out how to accommodate your life around it. So that's what I mean by, like, it is a big jump, and there's a certain period in your life where you're okay with the travel, you're okay with the constant back and forth. So that's why I did it then.
After spending 3 years as Chief Operating Officer at Bread Labs, the company was later acquired by Yahoo. As someone who's been involved in various ventures, from founding startups to leading major entertainment and gaming companies, how do you determine when it's time to let go of something you're passionate about, especially when it's your own creation?
Yeah, so a lot of times I think in startups, the startup will pivot multiple times, right? And you're constantly trying to figure out how to find a new direction. And I think similar to what I learned at Google, like after a while, if the creation you started has evolved to something that you are doing because you feel like you have to, not because you feel like you want to, it's time to move on, right? And so we were fortunate enough to find a buyer. We were fortunate enough to have a nice landing, and then we all allowed most of us to go on and pursue something else.
Let's kind of progress along your career a little bit. It's spanned a wide range of industries, from tech and e-commerce to digital media and eSports. What was the turning point that made you realize you wanted to dive into the anime entertainment industry, particularly with Crunchyroll?
That's a good question, right? So I think my career at Crunchyroll started relatively fortuitously. So the founder of Crunchyroll was also a Berkeley alum, right? He and I were the same year, same major. We didn't know each other that well, but like literally ran into him in a coffee shop in San Francisco, and he was like, "Hey, I think I know you." And I'm like, "I think I know you too." And then we just literally just jump started a conversation. He's like, "What are you doing now?" I'm like, "I have no idea. I hate my job right now at Yahoo." I mean, strike that from the record, right? I was like, "Oh, this is not my passion. I want to do something else." He's like, "You should come over and take a look." So I went over and started taking a look, and I was like, "Oh, this is kind of fun." So that's how I started there.
We're now living in the age of streaming, with Forbes reporting that the overwhelming majority of US households pay for at least one streaming service. How has the rise of on-demand entertainment been reflected through your experience in media business over the years?
Didn't fully follow the question.
Yeah, so basically, there's a lot more streaming services now.
Yep.
Lots of people are paying for them. How has the rise of this sort of on-demand entertainment been reflected through your experiences in media business over the years?
Yeah, I mean, so the broader media landscape has sort of shifted back and forth, right? And so, you know, when Netflix first came about, everybody was cord cutting, right? So you had this massive shift from like saying, why would I pay for a $60 cable package when I can pay $10 for a streaming business? I do think we are in a period where now there's so many streaming services and most people have multiple that you're essentially paying the same price for 5 streaming services that you did for cable. So I think the media ecosystem goes back and forth, or it reverberates. Like the delivery mechanism of whether it goes to your TV, whether it goes to a cable, right, whether it goes to satellite, whether it goes to your digital internet, that might evolve, but I think people's consumption habits, people's preferences for content, that has stayed relatively consistent and seesaw back and forth to a degree. So if anything, I think we have come, you know, in a way almost full circle, right? Where you see bundles of streaming services now, or like packages now that are very reminiscent of the old cable days. So I actually think it's been sort of an evolving evolution, and we're sort of coming back again. So we'll see how it pans out.
Let's dive deeper into your role at Crunchyroll now. So since its founding in 2006, it has skyrocketed in popularity, along with interest in Japanese anime. In your opinion, what makes anime such a compelling genre for so many people in the West and the world?
Yeah, so obviously I can go talk about this for like days, right? But I think where I would start is, to me, like the fundamental element that makes anime very different is I wouldn't even consider it a genre, right? Because there are so many subgenres and sub-segments of anime. We usually call it a medium, right? Because it is a format of content that represents all kinds of different thematical elements. There's so many subgenres aimed towards different genders, different age groups, different subcultures. So I think that's what really resonates, right? And the second piece of that is that the narrative telling and the storytelling is very, very deep, right? And I think you can find elements of it no matter what your passion is, right? There are literally entire segments of the overall medium that if you were just into sports, there's like a ton of sports anime that you can watch. If you're into cooking, there's a bunch of ones. If you're into fashion, there's a bunch of ones, right? If you're into like detectives, spies, whatever. So I think because of the breadth of the overall format and medium, I think it's attracted people from all walks of life, all ages, and all different categories of people.
Building on that consumer side and reaching people, you oversee the transformation of well-loved animes into games and products. Compared to your previous roles, what is unique about the consumer tendencies of anime fans that inform your marketing strategy?
Yeah, so I think our consumers are what we consider like hyper passionate consumers, right? Their lifestyle gets absorbed within the anime ecosystem, right? So seldom do we find a core fan of anime who's just like, yeah, I'm just gonna watch a show, I don't care about anything else, right? Like they're gonna go and play a game, they're gonna own some kind of merch, they're gonna go to the events because they want to absorb and be absorbed in the anime world, right? And so how that's influenced Crunchyroll's approach has been where we structure a concept called the flywheel, right? Where we basically want to give you elements of everything that you love, right? So we want to give you elements of games. We want to give you elements of consumer products, merchandise, apparel. We want to give you elements of manga, theatrical. So over time, when we first started Crunchyroll a long time ago, we used to have this kind of model where we're like, we want to be something for everyone, right? Over time, that's actually dramatically shifted because we're not trying to be something for everyone because everybody's different, right? We actually are shifted towards we want to be everything for someone, right? So everything about anime for that type of fan. And I think that's where we've really evolved our thinking.
So Crunchyroll has evolved into more than just a streaming platform like you've kind of touched on here. How do you approach expanding Crunchyroll's offerings beyond just streaming and transforming the platform into a full 360-degree anime experience?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is finding the right segments to enter, right? Part of it is making sure that we can actually deliver value, right? And so, case in point is, I'm sure people will love, having like AR, VR for anime, right? Like we have to sort of be realistic about like what can we deliver that is going to be high quality enough for our users, right? So it took us a really long time to think about like, do we get into games? Do we get into merchandise, right? Because we didn't want to produce merchandise and apparel that you would not know the difference between that and some bootleg off the street, right? We wanted to make sure like if we're gonna get into this, it has to be of the highest quality, right? Same thing with games, right? It took us a really long time. We're still finding our footing about like how do we find the right game to bring to our audience so that it doesn't seem like just a mobile cash grab or whatnot. So I think that is very top of mind when we consider what to bring into the flywheel, and I think that's why it's always going to be an evolving process.
Furthering this thread of deciding what to bring and deliver to the audience, in an interview with CBR, you emphasized Crunchyroll Games' selective quality threshold, which prioritizes the developer perspective. How do you bridge the gap between a developer team's initial conceptualization and your overarching product standards to ensure a final result that satisfies both parties?
Yeah, I think you're touching on a topic that's probably one of the hardest to really manage over time, right? Because it's not just about like what the developer's perception of quality wants, right? You also have different objectives, and ultimately we even find that there are different expectations between if you're working with Western developers versus Eastern developers, Japanese versus Chinese versus Korean, right? They all have a different segmentation in mind. So a broader example I can give is like if you're working with a Chinese developer and they are going to view all of the Western market ex-China as a nice bonus, right? Because they're primarily focused on developing that game and its core loop, its all its mechanics, all its designs for the Chinese market. And so you have to make sure that their incentives in designing the game is at least strong enough to make the Western version, frankly, not suck, right? But if you're working with a Western developer, they don't have the same inroads, right? They can't just be like, oh, I'm gonna make a version for China because it's much harder to get a game into China. So then their dynamics, their motivations become fundamentally different. So depending on who the developer is, we change our entire kind of discussion strategy and even publishing strategy depending on who it is.
You mentioned that you work internationally with a lot of different cultures and other companies from different countries. How do you approach managing those relationships and integrating that within Crunchyroll's products?
Yeah, so this is gonna sound super played out, but like quite honestly, when we look at all these different regions, we start trying to figure out how to make a consistent fan experience, right? Because every region has different penetrations of mobile usage, digital usage, high-speed internet, payment gateways, right? Some regions are credit card heavy, some regions are cash heavy. So for us, instead of trying to figure out a consistent mechanism to check off all these operational levers, we focus on like what do we need to get to as a product, as a business, to have consistent fan experiences, right? We want to deliver a similar amount of quality content with the same type of subs and dubs. We want to have same access to games, same access to the catalog of shows. What do we need to get there? And then we will sort of work backwards on like, okay, to get here, who do we need to work with? What kind of partnerships do we need to strike to enable this? So I think that's how we approach it.
With regards to the fan experience and honing in on the business side we've kind of been discussing here, You've previously mentioned that Crunchyroll's approach when developing its games was to refrain from a business model that relies on monetization hooks and a pay-to-win structure. How do you find a balance between creating a platform that is financially accessible to a wide range of users while maintaining a commercially sound revenue framework?
Yeah, that's very tough, right? I mean, that's the hardest thing that everybody struggles with, right? I would say we are fortunate in that Crunchyroll is not a traditional game developer, for better or for worse, right? Like we don't have our own studios. We're not trying to have our own studios. I think where we are today in our thinking is that we want to focus on our strengths. Our strength is we have the rest of the ecosystem of the streaming platforms and the audience platforms, right? And so today we are heavily focused on finding games that and finding a portfolio of games that offer benefits to our subscribers, right? So one of the things that we added very recently at the end of last year is essentially, it's called Crunchyroll Game Vault, but it's essentially a collection of games that sit behind the subscription wall, right? The whole point was to say, like, we want to reward our users and give you access to something that you can't otherwise get, instead of trying to squeeze yet another dollar out of you off of a free-to-play game or offer a very heavy IAP-centric game. Now we're focused on like the games we publish. You know, we want to offer Crunchyroll members benefits in those games. Maybe you get discounts, maybe you get exclusive items, maybe you get something that you wouldn't get if you were a non-Crunchyroll user. That's where we really evolved our thinking of how games adds value to our fan base.
Touching on that idea of adding value to the fan base, as opposed to more general distributive platforms, how does Crunchyroll leverage its unique connection to the anime community?
Yeah, I mean, we end up participating in a lot of events, right? And a lot of communities in general, right? So we are active in all the places you find our fans, right? Whether it's Discord, whether it's Reddit, you know, we have formed partnerships with Twitch, we put partnerships with YouTube, you know, we form device partnerships, we form distribution partnerships, we attend 100 events a year across the region and in different languages. We work with different talent and celebrities across different regions, obviously focused on true fandom first, right? Like that's sort of a criteria of who we work with. And then probably the most prominent thing that we do that most people can probably see is we host a giant anime awards every year, right? A very large event. I think last year was something like 35 million votes. But the whole point is we're trying to give back to the ecosystem, right? So there's a particular reason why we don't call it the Crunchyroll Awards, right? We call it Anime Awards. And in fact, the last few years, I think some of the winners have been like non-Crunchyroll anime, right? But because we're trying to do the whole notion of like help the ecosystem win and everybody in the ecosystem will win, right? Rising tide, all boats, that kind of concept. So that's been our mantra.
You mentioned how you attend a lot of events and do a lot of partnerships with different influencers and companies. How do you approach outreaching to these outsources, and how do you decide which are the best avenues to go toward?
Yeah, I mean, slightly different, right? Because who we partner with from a company perspective is really around like brand ethos, right? You want to make sure that like, you know, we're not going to go partner with companies that are totally against our core values, right? On the fan and celebrity and influencer side, it's more about their genuine fandom, right? Like we have done experience in the past where we've gone after a big name who just didn't know enough about anime, and like that lack of authenticity, your fans will sniff it out immediately, right? And so what we've learned from that is we much rather go for sports stars, musicians, movie actors who are just like innately they are core anime fans. They get excited when we reach out to be like, hey, do you want to do something, right? And then we figure out like what to do around that afterwards. So instead of trying to figure out, you know, we need 10 celebrities for this one game we're promoting, we go after and talk to people who are just core anime fans. We're like, hey, let's just do something. What are you interested in? What are we interested in? What opportunities are arise? Let's have something organically happen instead of artificially creating this beat. So I think that's been the approach that we've seen connect with our fans a lot more.
Could you tell us about the most influential partnership that you've worked on?
The most influential one. So we've done a lot with different brands, right? And I think influence and impact can be measured differently, right? And so I'll give you a couple of examples, right? In terms of like pure reach, right? Then of course, if you're going to work with like a major distribution outlet like Twitch, you're going to have a lot of reach, right? Or Xbox, right? Or PlayStation, right? Our sister company. But then we think about partnerships where it also amplifies or brings anime into sort of like the upper conversation sphere. So we did a big partnership on exclusive merchandise with Gucci and Banana, the IP, right? It was a very limited collection, but we wanted to get this premium brand for anime out there for people to see. And then we've done a merchandise collection with Megan Thee Stallion, right? Which was really, really successful because she's a core anime fan, right? And she even presented as the central presenter at Anime Awards last year. And then we just dropped a collection between Logic and for Cowboy Bebop. So we're trying to find those things.
Let's dive deeper into the user side of Crunchyroll. So Crunchyroll recently made the decision to remove all user-generated content, including comment sections, to create a safer space in response to frequently harmful commentary. Given that online gaming communities often face similar issues of toxicity, how are you ensuring that Crunchyroll Games fosters inclusive and positive environments for all players?
Yeah, so that's obviously a very top of mind. We're talking to a couple of partners that specialize in toxicity in gaming and fandom and trying to figure out how do we do this in a more inclusive way, right? Because the challenge with the game side is that it's not a centralized platform like our streaming platform, right? Everybody comes to Crunchyroll to watch. Games, every single game is a separate mobile app published with a separate developer, right? And so right now what we're trying to do is think about ways to incorporate a layer of protection and user protection across all of our games. And essentially in our future deals, enforce that as a mechanism. Like if you're gonna work with Crunchyroll, you need to integrate this platform so that we can monitor player behavior and safety and allow users to report harassment and things like that. So I think that requires us to find some third-party partners just because we don't own every single development studio.
Let's take a step back and look at the bigger picture of your entire career now. So as someone who has successfully navigated both the startup world and corporate environments, what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs in the audience, particularly those who are looking to break into competitive industries like entertainment or tech?
That's a good question. What can I say that won't get me in trouble? I would say it will take have the right expectations, right? It will take a lot of tries. Don't ever get beaten down, and don't lose motivation if it takes you multiple tries to get in. All these industries are hyper competitive for a reason, right? But they're also hyper fun, and you have to really love it and want it. The second thing I would say is make sure you actually want the industry and the roles that you want to do, right? I have met so many people who are like, I want to get into games, and they get into games, they're like, I hate this industry, right? Because it's hyper aggressive and competitive, right? And it will always be that case because gaming is high risk, high reward, right? Like you have AAA studios. I mean, you'll see all of these articles about how tough the industry is. I would say same thing in media, right? Like if you're trying to get into media, it's one of those industries that looks super glamorous, but it takes a lot of hard work to get in and to build up, right? And so throw your ego out the door is another thing, right? Like you guys are all at a prestige university, right? You guys are gonna go out and graduate and go into the workforce, and and you're gonna say like, I'm from one of the best institutions in the world, right? This should be super easy for me. But I think at every layer of competition and every layer of career I've been to, every team I'm with happens to be the best team I've ever been with, right? That's sort of by nature, right? Because as your own career progresses, those around you progress by naturally, right? You're seldom gonna be in a situation where you're always the smartest person in the room. So throw your ego out and really continuously push, try. And then I think that's how you succeed, right? I think very few people, including myself, around all of us, are like, yeah, I instantly just walked into this role and now I'm like super senior, right? It just takes a lot of trial and error.
Touching more on the trial and error and how you mentioned that you aren't always going to like the first thing that you go into. How did you approach getting out of an area you realized you didn't like?
Yeah, so Google is a good example, right? Again, fantastic company, right? I mean, obviously. When I went in, the first inkling I had was, so I was an engineer, and all my teammates were all engineers, obviously, and I would realize that like during lunchtime, they're like talking about like some cool code snippet that they just built, right? They're like, oh, I just did this. I made my thing more X% more efficient, and I'm just kind of like, wow. I definitely do not like coding as much as you guys do. Like, I'd rather talk about like what games I'm playing, what TV show I'm watching. I'm overgeneralizing, but you know, after a couple of years of that, I realized like even if you can do this, like my heart's not in it because I clearly don't go home and read up the latest, new programming language that's coming up, the new constructs, new things, and so I started just pivoting towards my own role at Google, right? And I mean, this could get you into trouble in the wrong place, but my general personality has been ask for forgiveness, right? And so in the right way, right? So I just started taking on product management duties, right? And at some point, my director at the time was like, I haven't done a lot of coding lately. I'm like, I haven't, but I put together all these product specs. Maybe I should start doing this. And he's like, fine, go do that, right? And so, sort of orienting towards what you want to do, demonstrating that you can do it, demonstrating that you have an eye for it. And then I think good results will beget, support, right? After a while, I realized I haven't seen enough of the world. So I literally just said, hey, I'm going to go somewhere else and go to business school. And all of the leadership that I talked to at the time were hyper supportive, right? They were like, you should do it. If you want to come back, just come back, but just go do it, right? And I think that safety net gave me all the sort of courage and necessary backing I need to take all these chances. So, I think I probably don't have a good lesson here because I'm rambling, but I guess the point is, take a lot of different shots. Don't be afraid to experiment, and most places will let you try new things. So, ask for forgiveness instead of permission. At work.
Going back to your time at Berkeley here, what was the most important lesson or skill you took away from here that has helped shape your career trajectory?
That is a good question. I'm gonna have to think about this because I mean, I don't think the lessons I learned here were from any of my courses. I mean, like they were very hard courses, but I think more of it was around. I think I did a lot of trial and error at Berkeley, right? I took a lot of classes that I was like, man, this sucks. I hated this. I dropped out. I dropped a lot of classes. I was just telling some folks earlier that like, I went in and I had some crazy 24 unit semesters in my first couple of years because my goal was I'm gonna jam pack all this in my second 2 years. I'm gonna coast, right? And yeah, it worked. But then the second 2 years, I was like bored out of my mind, right? Like I was like, I don't know what to do. You can only go to the RSF so many times a day, right? And so, but it taught me that like pacing is important. It taught me that having a plan is important instead of just going in head first. So that's probably some of the lessons I've learned.
For the sake of time, this will be our final question for the night, followed by the audience Q&A. You've had an incredible journey at Crunchyroll, leading its expansion into gaming, merchandise, and more. So what's next for you? Do you see yourself continuing to grow with Crunchyroll, or are there new industries and endeavors on the horizon?
Yeah, so I get that question a lot because I've been at Crunchyroll for 12 years. That includes me leaving, going to Riot, and then coming back, right? And so I think I've learned throughout my career, at least till this point, that I'm gonna stop chasing titles and company labels, right? Like, and I recognize I'm fortunate enough to be able to say that based on my career trajectory, right? But nevertheless, like, having had the Googles and the Yahoos, like, where my focus now is, I just want to do what I find fun and adding value. So as long as Crunchyroll continues to grow, which it is growing crazily, right? As long as we still put our values towards serving our fans first and serving the overall ecosystem first, I don't see a reason for me to leave, right? I think I really changed my career to focus more on enjoying what you do instead of chasing a specific moniker.
Thank you so much for your insight tonight, Terry. Before we go into our Q&A, we'd love to know, what's your favorite anime?
Yes, it has not changed since I first started. So I really like an anime called Hajime no Ippo, which is a boxing anime. I also used to be really into boxing. And so that was one of those, and it had a lot of good themes, right? Around like, trying your best and working really hard. I guess all animes are trying your best, working really hard. So if you guys get a chance, watch it. It is super exciting. There are elements of it that are a little bit more like Dragon Ball Z-ish, where it's like, yeah, this one fight is gonna take 4 episodes, and every round, they start thinking about the mental things. But it's very good, right? And it's one of the better sports animes that I've seen.
I would now like to open up the floor to audience Q&A. A forum member will come around with a mic, and please raise your hand until I call on you. Or I guess there's no mic, so just speak out loud.
I was like, there's a mic?
Yes, Nikki.
How did you find yourself, so you started as a software engineer, how did you find yourself in the law track and the business track? And which, if at all, do you find yourself using the most in your current career?
Great question. I like to say that I had a plan, but I think really I just didn't know what I wanted to do. So I was like, oh, I'm done with engineering. Let me go try business. Oh, I tried finance. Let me go try law. But I think, jokes aside, I think I went to business school because I wanted a career change, right? And school is another degree is sort of like a very easy way to excuse a career change, because nobody's gonna like ask you why or whether you were bad at your first career, right? And so it gave me an avenue, and also it allowed me to learn a lot more, because all of a sudden you're in an environment where everyone around you has been a working professional, right? So you all have a plethora of different experiences. So I made that change, and then law school was really around the time that I was exiting the company, the startup, entering Crunchyroll, and I recognized that like I probably want to be entrepreneurial, right, for the rest of my foreseeable future, and I wanted to make sure I have the right tool set. So I literally went to law school, and the first thing I did when I went in and told them I don't want to be a lawyer. I literally just want to learn about the knowledge set, right? So don't give me a course to follow. I don't care to be whatever type of lawyer. I'm just going to pick the classes that I think are the most useful for me. And I found that to be a very meaningful way for me to like develop and learn. So I probably use my law degree more than my engineering degree for sure. But business is a little bit broad, right? So obviously use that every day. So good question though.
Yes, Miriam.
Being at Crunchyroll for 12 years, what would you say was your greatest personal achievement while you were doing your work?
Yeah, that's hard to answer, because when I joined Crunchyroll, it was very, very small, right? It was like 20-something people. It was, I think, 50,000 subscribers. We're at 15 million, right? So I've seen it grow like orders of magnitude. I've also done a ton of different things. So I think that's the other thing I always tell people, like, when I said like try a bunch of different things, right? Like if I went through Crunchyroll, I started as the head of product. And then I went and started the Korean drama business, and then started all their other Asian television businesses. Then I ran international Crunchyroll. Then I ran their events team, then the ad sales team. Then I started doing all my current teams, right? So I've done a little bit of everything, but that's what you get at a growing company, right? You get to try everything. So now when people are like, oh, have you done sales? Yes. Have you done like product? Yes. All the same company, right? So probably the biggest is probably spinning up games, right? Because that's literally something that didn't exist when we went there, and just pushing us into like an entirely new medium for us to get towards, and then everything else that follows that has been something that I take a lot of pride in, right? So.
Yes, Justin.
Given your business model at Crunchyroll, and you said you kind of changed from being something for everyone to being everything for someone, do you feel that Crunchyroll is more stable in terms of its subscription when there's economic downturns and stuff like that than, say, like a Netflix or Hulu?
I don't know, because I say that because I have tremendous respect for Netflix and Hulu, right? Like a lot of people from Crunchyroll are from Netflix, right? I think it's just Netflix didn't experience that big of a crash didn't experience any crash during the pandemic, right? Like it surged. I think generally speaking, entertainment, especially subscription streaming services, did quite well during downturns because the first thing you cut are things that are like significantly more expensive experiences and purchases. And the streaming service, like if you literally look at the raw value you're getting from like per dollar spent, the number of hours you're getting, like it's probably quite high on most streaming services. I would say Crunchyroll's fans are quite resilient, right? But that resiliency comes from the genuine passion they have for anime. So in that respect, I have seen our service be relatively stable because the fans are not gonna like suddenly like anime less, when there's a downturn. So I think if anything, they gravitate towards watching more, and and watching with their friends and doing something that they can do together, right? So.
Yeah, Vic.
What like TV shows or games are you like indulging in recently?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't really watch a lot of TV, which sounds terrible coming from as a media exec, because I travel so much. I still play a lot of games, and I play probably an insane amount of mobile games because I'm always on the go, which is probably not a good thing. Probably should not tell you how much I've spent on mobile games, but some form of entertainment, right?
Yeah, Josh.
You mentioned how you're done chasing titles and you want to chase fun instead. What would you think is the most enjoyable part of your job today?
Wow, where do I start? I think I'm very fortunate in that like my role at Crunchyroll is to do new stuff, right? To like figure out how to do new stuff, right? Like, and so probably the most fun is just it allows me to be super experimental, super risky in a way in what I pursue, all the while knowing that like there's a consistent theme what I'm trying to approach, which is can I add value back to my users, right? And that's a lot of fun working with the people I work with. I go to work very excited to hang out with my coworkers, right? We spend a lot of time bonding. I think I've been fortunate to have a lot of my team, my direct reports that are very passionate. They believe in me. They have faith in me, right? And so having people entrust their careers to you is also something that's extremely rewarding, right? Because it adds a lot of pressure, but adds a lot of rewarding feelings when you're doing that. So I think, I think the entire job is really rewarding because I think people actually want to go work there, right? People find a lot of fun. Even if you walk around the office, right? There's, it's like crazy anime decorations everywhere. Like half the time people are watching shows on TV, on their computers, to the point where I'm like, are you getting any work done or are you just watching anime? But, like there's a lot of collective funness, right? And so, and being able to go to these events and seeing just how crazy passionate the fans are, that is also extremely rewarding, right? I do like the fact that I get stopped quite a bit at the TSA because people are like, hey, whose bag is this? And I'm like, mine. They're like, oh, you were from Crunchyroll? That's really cool. I'm like, oh, thanks. So.
Yeah.
I have a pretty basic question, but I'm just interested because I also work in like the mobile gaming space. But with Crunchyroll's recent expansion into mobile gaming, what have been your biggest challenges? Because all of these other streaming competitors are also trying to get into this space. None of these titles are mature because they're all new, so there's not really any kind of historical data to optimize marketing on. But I'm sure you get a lot of like organic installs from your anime IP. So just wanted to know what those challenges are for you.
Yeah. So our challenges, to your point, have not been can we get people to look at these games, right? Like we already have the audience. Our challenges have been can we find the right games, right? Because our focus is to bring anime and anime-esque games, right? And for better or for worse, a majority of these titles today start from the Eastern Hemisphere, right? They start from China, Japan, Korea, right? And a lot of times these games are just fundamentally designed for a different audience, right? When you think about just like the core loop, the mechanic, the depth, the rate of monetization, right? The way of which gachas work, right? Simple things that like may not seem like a big deal, but like for example, a lot of games that are built in Asia, they have an infinite gacha system. Like there's no pity system in that design, right? Whereas in the West, like if you're publishing a game here, you're gonna implement some kind of pity system because you can't like gouge the people forever, right? And so even having those subtle differences can make a big difference between whether your game is well received here or not. So our biggest challenge is just like you can have an amazing IP game there, but then some tweaks in the game loop fundamentally don't do well here, and now the entire game isn't successful. So now we have to figure out how to tweak, what to tweak, when to tweak it. So that's always going to be a challenge for anyone taking games from the East to the West, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Do you have any anime hot takes?
I'm so old, I don't even know what that question means.
Are there like any stances that you have on like maybe like popular anime shows or like just generally being in the anime community that you think is like overrated in a way?
Oh, overrated? I don't think so, but I do think people need to watch some of the newer stuff, right? Like, no knocks on like One Piece, Dragon Ball, especially because they are our core partners. So amazing shows. If a partner ever watches this, amazing. But I mean, there's so much new content coming out. There's so much new IP coming out, right? I wish that the folks who are discovering anime now would take more chances at watching broader sets of shows, right? Because I think there's so much good content. If you look at the normal 80-20 rule, right? Like 20% of the content gets 80% of the viewership. That to me is a shame within anime, because there's so much good content out there, right? And that's sort of one of the reasons why we are engaging in things like anime awards, because we want people to know about all these other shows and all these genres that you may not have heard about or care to watch. So I don't know if that counts as a hot take, but it's the closest thing I can get to.
Yes, Megan.
You've worn so many different hats and have been in so many different positions in your career. How do you manage a work-life balance? Like what works for you, I guess?
Yeah, I'm not very good at managing work-life balance, to be honest.
How do you prioritize what's important to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, right? Because I think your life circumstances just sort of change and evolve over time. I think your objective change over time too, right? When you first start your career, you're probably very focused on climbing that corporate ladder or getting the next round of funding, depending on which side of the ladder you're on, right? And I think so all your time is spent like figuring out how to advance career, right? And I think over time, as you develop your career, probably you end up spending much more of your time figuring out like how to serve the company mission, which sounds kind of dorky, right, in a way, but like it's really important, because you can't be a good company leader when you don't believe or don't serve the mission, because your employees will be like, what are you doing here, right? You seem disingenuous. So already there's a big shift from like me to us, right? And then as you further develop in your career, you start to have massive responsibilities for your teams, right? So then it becomes them, because if you're not taking care of your team, then you have literally people's entire dreams, careers, and aspirations that you're responsible for, right? Like not to get like too deep, right? Like the first time I had to like fire someone, it was like extremely difficult, right? Like that person was tearing up in front of me, telling me what they're gonna do, and that hit me the first time. Like, yeah, as you get advanced in your career, like your decisions impact a ton of people's lives, right? And so my priorities have started shifting that way in terms of career perspective. And then finally, it's getting to be a long answer, work-life balance gets another element added to it, which is your duties as an individual outside of work, right? If you have a family, if you have kids, then naturally you have to figure out how to make time for them, right? As hard as it is, right? And I think it's very hard for a lot of senior leaders who, like me, have to travel a ton, right? And then you have to worry about your health too, right? There was a period where I was like 40 pounds heavier than this, right? And my doctor was like, you need to lose weight or else you are gonna have problems, right? I was like, okay, I'm gonna start running 10K a day and doing all that, so. Not the best answer, but.
Yeah, Shannon, go ahead.
I feel like until recently, anime has been regarded as a counterculture in the way that it's not as normalized as it is now. And like with the emergence of Crunchyroll, you know, now like it's a lot more like prevalent in Western media just because our access to it is so much easier. And it's like in totality normalized something that used to be niche and like honestly negatively looked down upon. So I guess my question is, how much do you consider that when you're developing games?
Quite a bit, right? Because, and shows too, like Crunchyroll produces a lot of shows as well, co-produces a lot of shows with our Japanese partners. I think one of the things that we consider a lot is, it's cool to be countercultural, right? It's cool to be like eclectic, but you don't want to be exclusionary, right? You don't want to be too exclusive that like people who would otherwise be interested don't figure out how to access that community, right? And so what we've been trying to do is figuring out how to take our forms of media, whether it's a game, whether it's a show, and slowly work with our partners in Japan to incorporate regional themes outside of Asia, right? So not just like Western themes for Western shows, but you know, Crunchyroll also launched recently in India, right? And we're trying to think about like, well, if we really want that community to adopt anime as a medium, they already love anime, but if we want them to like recognize this as a bigger part of their culture, we've got to be able to figure out how to slowly ingratiate parts of, you know, Indian culture, Indian storytelling, folklore into this, right? And same thing what we're trying to do in Brazil and Mexico and you know, Southeast Asia. So that's how we've been thinking about the expansion of anime as a recognized medium. Right?
Yeah, nerd.
So obviously you've had a lot of different career paths and you've been in many different companies and you even changed your major. I'm just curious because a lot of us, I guess, are still a lot of us are still students. I mean, all of us are still students.
Like a lot of people.
Sometimes we have people from outside that come in, but it seems like we are. I think we all kind of have we believe in like the concept of having a dream job, for example. So I was just curious whether you feel like this currently is your dream job or whether you think that the concept is something true to you.
I think I've been fairly disciplined in my career to not stay at a job I don't like, right? And so I think the fact that I've stayed here for this long, I never consider that like a dream job, but I think I've stayed here this long that I can say like, yeah, this is what I love right now, right? I like when a lot of my friends thought I was crazy when I left Google the first time, right? A lot of people thought I was crazy when I left Riot, right? I mean, those are all good companies, but fundamentally, just because you work at a good company doesn't mean your role is your dream role, right? And so I think, you know, I've been very disciplined about like, yep, great company, no, I'm leaving, right? And I think Crunchyroll right now, what I do right now has been extremely rewarding, so. Looks like we're good.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Oh yes, Danny.
You mentioned how you've been like strongly addicted to mobile games. What is your current obsession as a mobile game right now?
Well, I feel compelled to say all the Crunchyroll games, but that's probably not true. I play a couple of games, but I play Galaxy Heroes. I play Strike Force. I do play Street Fighter Duel from Crunchyroll. Not a plug, but I actually do play. I generally play games that are like, you can pick up and like play for 5 minutes, right? Or a couple of battles and put down and you don't have to like come back and monitor it. And they know that, right? They target people who are like, I don't have time, you know, I would just pay for this and then come back to it, so yeah.
Well, thank you again for coming, Terry. It was a pleasure having you.
Thanks for having me.